Uh, Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to wait a moment to get people into the room. Doug is ready. He's waiting, but I'm going to give it a minute until we start this panel to allow all our audience to join. It's the final session of the day, and we want to make sure as many of you as possible can enjoy it. Great. I'll get going. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us today. It's been a pleasure to host you all. I hope you've had a really good day. Those of you from Europe or further east, I know it's very late on in the evening for you now, so I appreciate you sticking with us. Final panel of the day. We couldn't have a more esteemed assortment of panelists, some fantastic, I think what we call end users who are really embracing quantum technologies, very much at the vanguard of innovation when talking about the paradigm shift, which is quantum. To lead us in this panel, we have a long-term supporter of quantum tech, someone who's passionate about quantum computing and quantum technologies in general, Doug Finke from the Quantum Computing Report. Doug, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Lawrence. First, I want to thank the members of the audience who have stuck through all this for the final panel session of the day, but we'll be the best. So look forward to telling you a little bit about what we're doing. I realize that a lot of the members of the audience are what I would call end users, people who are either thinking about getting into quantum or just starting their quantum journey. And they have a lot of questions about how do I do it? So what we've done is we've assembled some people who are involved in quantum, have already gone through that journey. They may not be all the way through, but what we're going to do is we're going to learn a little bit from their experiences. Maybe they can give you some tips on how you can get started with your own program. So with that, I will let each member of the panel introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves, their company, and what they're involved with quantum. And Brian Standen, we'll start with you, and you can just tell us what you're doing with BASF.
Great, thanks, Doug. Hi, my name is Brian Standen. Pleasure to see you all here, or at least to virtually see you all here. So I lead something called Next Generation Computing at BASF, and it's a way that we actually think about next generation computing architectures. We know that quantum is clearly one of the ones that is at the forefront, and if I'm honest with you, is probably occupying the majority of my time in terms of next generation computing. But we certainly also understand that there are other computing architectures that we think could have an impact on us. And that could include something like neuromorphic computing as it starts to mature, as well as other improvements that we see in the field of supercomputing, for which we actually have a fairly long history. And so if I give you a little bit of how we sort of came to quantum, our journey started back in 2017 with a sort of organic bottom-up collaboration with a company out of Germany called Heisenberg Quantum Simulations. We did that work with them, which resulted in a publication. And that was led by some of our researchers in the R&D platforms to help us to sort of understand the impact that quantum could have for us. Well, since then it's grown, and we've taken on a number of things. In between then and now, we invested in Zapata computing, and so we did that through our venture capital branch of BASF, and we also have a strategic collaboration with them. We are a partner. And so that's a great collaboration. We're doing some interesting things in machine learning with them. We are also in collaboration with Google and other partners who we think actually can help to move the needle forward. I think this comes from a recognition that we firmly believe this will have impact in the chemical industry.
Brian, maybe you could speak up. Your mic is a little bit low.
Sorry. We firmly believe this will have an impact for the chemical industry. And we know that that impact can be significant, and we want to be there as this technology develops and help to guide the way that it develops. And you'll learn more about that hopefully through the panel, and I'll share that as we go. So thanks.
Okay, great. Next is Thomas Ehmer from Merck. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and what you're doing right now in quantum.
Yes, thanks, Doug. And because we are international audience, we have every time the same issue that there are two different Mercks. So there is, you've seen Kamchana, I guess. This is from Merck & Co., who operate as Merck & Co. in the US and as MSD outside. And we are the other ones who operate as Merck KGaA. We're a German company. And we don't have only pharmaceuticals. We also have electronics business, which is meaning we also think of providing materials to quantum computing industry, and we have a life science business. So we have a bit of a similar journey that, as Brian mentioned. We also work together with HQS, so the quantum Heisenberg Quantum Systems, who got 2 years ago. We have sponsored a research grant with those guys, and we're doing investigation how we can use the NISQ area to do something useful. And we also have a ventures branch where we did a significant investment in Seek, a company based out of Boston who is building digital quantum computers. And based on that, we have lots of partnerships, also just a recent grant via the UK, where we work together with Riverlane as a very comfortable position as an end user. And the journey started also, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, where we were looking individually for individuals in the company, looking what quantum computing could do as one of the novel computing paradigms. And then 3 years ago, we did found really a task force, where we condensed up to 100 people currently in the company to really investigate where it makes sense to look at quantum computing. And I think that the very interesting part is everywhere you say we do quantum computing, everybody says you're nuts. This is not mature. There are other methods out. And I think the fundamental topic I hope we will touch later in the talk is really a term that meanwhile is called quantum literacy, to understand what quantum computing can do, what it cannot do, and identify where it's relevant to your business problems. And then there are different approaches, of course, to do it. You dive deep and try to build your own algorithms, or you just partner with consultants, or you do some PhD. So that there are different approaches. We're trying them all. And I think it's really cool to the main thing that I think brought us up to speed is that we started very early to talk to other companies. I think that's important. So I think as well, Brian and Elisa are from pharma and chemical companies. So we have a network there, QPharm. Then we, as a German company, we were co-founders also of QTAC, a German quantum computing application group, where we really look from an end user perspective. And it's really very important just to talk to each other and to not hide things, but share challenges and share ideas. I think that's what brought us up to speed and really gave us a boost from nobody to contributor. I think that was very helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful, and hopefully we'll do some of that here. Okay, next is Elisabeth Kiseeva from Boehringer Ingelheim. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're up to with quantum.
Yeah, hi Doug, and hi everyone else in the audience. It's really amazing and really cool to be back at Quantum.Tech. So my name is Elisabeth Kiseeva, and I'm a quantum computing scientist at Boehringer Ingelheim. I have a PhD in quantum computing. I come from the traditional academia path where quantum computing initially started. And I kind of made a transition from working on more of the physics problems of quantum computing to really now the application layer and specifically the pharmaceutical industry. The path of Boehringer Ingelheim into quantum computing was a very short one, very fast paced. So the first ideas were really brought up in the beginning of last year. So I believe around February 2020. to set up a quantum computing lab within BI. And in September, October, we were already 5 people, full-time, just working on quantum computing, all of us coming either from industry or academia, but quantum computing scientists. And we really went and dug very deep into the product pipeline of BI and identify use cases that can be sped up by quantum computing. So this is how we work. And after that, of course, we chose the best partners for these use cases. And it has been very fruitful, very fast-paced year, because it's now just about a year since we started. Our main and biggest collaborator is Google Quantum AI. And I can share that with them. We are working on molecular dynamics and really fundamental, let's say, bottlenecks of molecular dynamics and precise, extremely precise calculations that will help us in our simulation of molecules that we want to develop for drugs. Except for them, we have a few other partners as well. And we are also part, as Thomas said, of QTAC and QUIC. And we like to collaborate and we like to discuss how can we move the field forward with the other companies from pharma and also materials.
Okay, well, thank you, Elica. And last but not least, Peter Bordow from Wells Fargo. Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in quantum.
Yeah, thanks, Doug, and thanks for having me back. It's a pleasure to be back again at Quantum.Tech. Love this conference, and thanks for everyone for attending. So I am Peter Bordow. I'm the principal architect for advanced technology, and I lead the quantum and emerging technology R&D team. It's a cross-functional team made up of representation and collaborative efforts from around the enterprise, subject matter experts from a number of different areas. Yeah, and so I have a electrical engineering background back in the Stone Age, the early days of computing, a lot of hardware design. And I had the distinct opportunity to play in a lot of different areas, including information security, data center architecture, hardware design, database and data engineering. And so I've always been interested in the latest and greatest technologies that have come along over the last 30 years or so. And so for me, the journey began about 4 or 5 years ago. I've always been a amateur closet physicist or physics student, shall we say, without much formal training. Always been interested in quantum mechanics. And so our journey, for me at least, began organically with a keen interest. So we sort of had a small group of folks here that were interested similarly in quantum mechanics and quantum technology. And so we really grew our learning and sophistication in this area organically over the last 4 years. And so we've sort of started off with a pretty broad look in quantum technology in general, looking at both quantum advantage opportunities in the compute space, as well as defensive postures, right? Preparing for the eventual quantum threat and post-quantum cryptography. So we've got a pretty broad interest area. Yeah, and so much of the learnings that we've accomplished have been organically based, right? So we've done our own research, we've read lots of papers, we've done lots of investigation and using a lot of the free tools out there. And then over the last couple of years, that sort of coalesced into a more formal effort. And then I think it was about 19 or 20 months ago, we announced a formal partnership with IBM and their quantum research teams. And so, yeah, I mean, much like most financial institutions, we're looking at a specific number of use cases in the area to potentially evaluate the timing and impact of gaining quantum advantage using hardware, quantum hardware platforms. But yeah, it's a long journey, and it's been an interesting one. So it's been a combination of skills. It's been a combination of broad understanding of the technological foundations. And then it's been a pretty aggressive journey in education and awareness, right? Spreading the message, educating others, and having leadership really understand the potential value proposition of this space overall. But yeah, I wouldn't trade it for everything or anything.
Okay, very good. So we'll go through a series of questions and answers. I would certainly encourage anyone in the audience to type in your questions, and we'll try to get to them as much as we have time. But I'll start with a few of my own, and I'm going to start with a very quick sort of two-word poll, and that is, in a corporation, projects either get started what I would call tops down, either a CEO or CTO or some senior executive says, you know, we got to do this, and then they'll find people to do it, or they start bottoms up. Is some engineer or some research somewhere says, hey, I think this is good, and they go to management and they convince them to do that. If you were to characterize how your program got started in your company, would you say it's tops down or bottoms up? And again, we'll start with you, Thomas.
Viral. So I think it's bottom up, and then they took it up and tried to push it top down, but it started bottom up. It's grassroots.
Okay, Elica.
For us, it was definitely top down. It was the idea of the CTO, and yeah.
Okay, Brian.
Is my mic better now?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Good. Okay. I would tell you it started bottom up, and then it became top down, and now it's both, which is, I think, for us ideal.
Well, that's certainly good. And then finally, you Peter.
Yeah, I definitely started bottom up, but at this point, there's a meeting in the middle from top down and bottom up.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like that's happening in a lot of companies. Okay, so the other thing that struck me is that Elica has university education in quantum, and the rest of us don't. You know, we got into quantum later on, and just wondering, you know, between Thomas and Brian and Peter, how you educated yourself on quantum. Did you take any of the courses, or did you just read books, or maybe just say a little bit about how you got up to speed with quantum technology? And again, start with Thomas.
Actually, I'm in a comfortable position because I'm also a physicist. I did quantum in my studies, but I fully gave it up when joining industry, and now it's coming back. So it's really interesting. And for quantum computing learning, there are of course very good books and good courses. So we did the MIT X Pro on quantum computing, which I can really recommend. So these are 2 courses, and not really super cheap, but also not super expensive, and they're covering a broad range. And of course, there are very good books out. I mean, I can maybe later post some interesting things. One topic which is very close to my heart is the work from Bob Kirky, who is doing the visualization of quantum processes, because this is really a complete novel approach where you can ignore the mathematics and to come down to the fundamentals. So this is a very interesting work I very much like.
Okay. Brian, how did you educate yourself?
Yeah, so maybe I'm coming from a background that would be rather unusual for understanding this, because my undergraduate degree is in anthropology and English, and I have an MBA. So what am I doing with tech? I've spent 26 years around tech, and quantum has always sort of been on the fringe of computation, at least in my early part of my career, as we talked about what that would be like. So there's always been a sort of acknowledgement of it there. I don't know that I actually thought I would see where we are now come so fast, but perhaps that's because I'm not a physicist. What I would say is that the way I learned was really to sort of just dive in. I just tried to consume as much content about quantum as I could, starting with videos on YouTube, starting with even supplier-related videos to kind of understand how their products fit into things, and sort of forming a broad landscape understanding of things. And then I would go deep where I felt I needed to go deep. I think I had to understand some of the fundamentals for sure. Like I think you have to understand at least the concept of superposition and entanglement to really get the idea behind why quantum computing would become so exponential in power. But it really was a lot of that sort of self-taught approach. I think also, you know, like Scott Aronson has actually released a lot of his lectures online, so you can go and you can read through that. So the depth of technical is really up to you, how far you want to go and how deep you want to go. For me, I think it's important that I don't go too deep, because we have people within the company who are deeper than me. And that's important to have, I think, to help cut through some of the hype. but I also think that I want to keep an eye on the business opportunity to help push it. It can't just be, at least for us, a technical play. It has to also be a business play. So that was, I think, some of the ways that I've kind of learned. And then from each other, right? I think these conferences are great ways for us to learn. The conversations that Thomas alluded to before, just like I think Thomas and Elica, we are part of QTAC, we're a founding member. These are all great ways to have conversations and to understand how quantum will impact us, especially in a more clear industrial application.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, so I've had a keen interest in quantum mechanics and astrophysics and those areas for quite some time, 10, 15 years at least. And so I've done a lot of casual reading on the subject and talked to a lot of folks on semi-related subjects like quantum time and string theory. And I've always been fascinated by that ever since the double slit experiment back when I was a teenager. It's always captured my imagination. So for me, it was really a matter of digesting reading materials, right? I read as much stuff as I could put my hands on over the last 5 or 6 years or so. Conferences like these are really helpful too, talking to really smart people and not being afraid to challenge the ideas, and especially not being afraid to ask what seemingly might be dumb questions, right? Sometimes there's a lot of wisdom in the dumb questions, actually. And then talking to vendors, there's a lot to be gained from investigating what these startups and large companies have been up to. And then, of course, there are some free learning tools. Personally, I played around with IBM's Q experience back when it first started up. And so, yeah, it's a slow uphill journey. But for me, it's been one of passion. So it's been easy.
Yeah, Doug, if I could maybe just build off that really quick. I think so. Peter hinted to something that I think is fundamentally important. I also spent some time in Qiskit, right, and programmed and tried it out. And that sort of learning by doing, I think, is also an important element to getting an understanding of what really what is capable of doing the technology.
Yeah, I also, I'm proud to say I was the very first reviewer of the IBM Q experience. They released it in May 2016. I think a week later, I had an article titled First Looks, IBM Quantum or something like that. So it was a pretty good interface for what they did at the time.
Yeah, Doug, could I jump in just to dovetail onto something that Brian said initially as well? So yeah, for me especially, there's a balance, there's a dance between getting into the real weeds of the mechanics and engineering behind algorithm development versus looking at the broader picture from an architectural and business standpoint. And sometimes balancing those two worlds can be quite difficult. So I think one of the keys to evolving the program is knowing where your skills lie and where you should and shouldn't dwell, right? Getting down into the weeds can be a real rabbit hole. So yeah, I think learning has to be targeted to a certain degree as well, and how you apply the knowledge.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So let's move on to a topic I'll call problem identification. I think everyone knows, or at least they should know, that quantum can't solve everything. There are just some problems that, it's not good for. So I think one of the first steps that you have to do in a corporation is, how do you identify the right problems to work on? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the steps. Hopefully you guys are all working on POCs right now, or those types of things. How did you choose them, and what process did you go to understand or figure out what you wanted to work on first? And I'm going in order of what I see you guys on the screen. So again, Thomas is the upper left-hand corner for me.
Okay, icebreaker. So that's a very good question. So there is, of course, the hope that you have something like an advantage. I think that's still far out, that you can do some things with quantum that you cannot do otherwise. It's also a lot of curiosity and exploration. I mean, we are a curiosity company, and often I just ask challenges to students. So we like to participate in these kinds of hackathons. We just finished a hackathon from TU Munich, from the QEL lab, and we gave them a challenge on quantum natural language processing. I said, we have the challenge in healthcare, at least, that we have lots of information, and we need to do a triage relatively quickly. Is this an adverse event or not? And there is software out who can perform to a certain extent, and then there is nothing. And I just gave them the challenge, and they picked it up, and they did really build a prototype using quantum natural processing, and this was amazing. So it's out of curiosity, just throwing the challenge out and look what happens. Maybe somebody's going to pick it up. Then fundamental research, of course, is also interesting to say, can we turn, for example, a classical machine learning task into an optimization task? So instead of doing Monte Carlo simulations and look what happens, we say, this is our solution, tell us how we should customize our parameters, which is fundamental research. So there is nobody with a solution out. We tried, we had an RFP. And then on the other hand, there are, of course, these materials opportunities where we think should we participate in consortia, and we can learn on the one hand material optimization simulation topics. We are a chemical company, or we can even provide materials, but this is maybe not so much of interest to the majority of the team. But I think it's mainly curiosity driven, because there is no real killer app out. Of course, everybody wants this personalized drug, yeah, and with no side effects and huge turnover and precision medicine, etc., which is a very specific wish. But I think quantum is not the magic bullet to solve everything. But that's mainly. Does this answer the question? Is this a good?
Yeah. I mean, definitely still very, very early on. I'll have a follow-up question once we get through this round, but okay. We'll get through that in a second. Elica, how did you choose some of your first POCs? Did you do any audits, or did you bring in outside consultants to help you tell you which applications to work on?
So we actually did work with outside consultants, but it was more on the, let's say, business and just organizational part of the team, and also on identification of the use cases. But the way we did it, I think it's very important is to understand that, like, it really depends on if you're looking on NISQ use cases, or if you're looking towards fault-tolerant use cases. And the truth is, at least for our industry, that even if someone delivers a fault-tolerant quantum computer tomorrow, most likely we will not be using it effectively to design better drugs, because the algorithms that we have at hand for fault-tolerant quantum computation would require times that are longer than the lifetime of a human. To do a computational step in molecular simulations and molecular dynamics. So basically, if you want to look at the use case for fault-tolerant quantum computing, I definitely believe that you need to go into really basic research, and to be very aware that, you know, it will be research. Maybe you find something really amazing. Maybe you'll find that other improvements have to be considered. But this is the case for fault-tolerant quantum computing. While for NISQ, you know, we hope to be there much sooner. We see first signals already for possible advantage using NISQ devices and NISQ algorithms. So there you have to really also choose the use cases that would require this extra level, one small part maybe of the whole problem that will be sped up by quantum computing. You will not be able to do a very big use case, very big computation on a NISQ device, because they are small and noisy. But you might be able to just simulate part of your problem on a NISQ device, and that will be the part that will give you this extra juice and outperform the computation if it is done on a fully classical device. And so the way we did it, as I mentioned also in the beginning, we really went down the product pipeline. We considered these kind of extremes, you know, fault tolerance and NISQ algorithms, and also use cases. And we really interfaced with all the specialists within BI that their work is really to develop drugs, while we were all quantum computing people. So there was kind of some translation needed for some time and steep learning curve. But then at the end we found our use cases, and I think it was a very successful work.
Okay, well, good. Looking forward to hearing more of your results in coming years.
Next week.
No, next week.
Yeah.
Technology is moving quick. Okay, how about you, Brian? How did you identify some of your first applications to try out with quantum?
I think not unlike what Thomas was describing, because we started bottom up. This was really about curiosity. At the end of the day, the same quantum mechanics that function for a quantum computer are also relevant to us in understanding chemistry. And so there's a very natural fit to the platform, to the types of use cases that we ultimately have within the company. So that was really, I think, the starting point, right? And looking at toy problems and toy systems and how those can fit on NISC, and how well NISC can perform. Where the bottlenecks really lie. Do they lie in algorithm development? Do they lie in hardware? Real truth.
Speak up, Brian.
It's in both, right? Yeah. For sure. Both algorithms and in hardware is what we learned. But then I think as we developed that, what we developed is sort of an understanding of how we can actually apply this to the enterprise as a whole. And I think that that's one of the things that we consider every time we go out. It is, of course, I think relevant to our R&D platforms and important to our R&D platforms, but it's not just R&D. When we start to explore machine learning and optimization and some of those type of challenges, the whole enterprise becomes open to us. And so you would find us interested in ways in which we can apply portfolio management in finance, something that would probably be much more relevant to what Peter's doing, but how that also impacts us, because it will in some way. Supply chain, logistics are all within scope from an optimization standpoint and important to the function of the business. So while I think we look at our core and we build from our core, we also consider those things that are supporting how we actually develop our products and how we get them out the door. And so we started organically like that, as I mentioned, but then I think we looked broader across the organization. And what we happily discovered is that we can find use cases in almost every corner of our company. And that's actually also partly because BASF is so diversified in the types of businesses we're in. So we have a bit of an advantage in that way, but it also creates some of the challenge that I think Elica had mentioned is, how do we translate now this computational power and the potential we see for it? How does that fit into the domains of all these very specific businesses?
Okay. And how about you, Peter? How do you guys look at what first the use cases would be, and then what the apps would be?
Yeah. So I'll speak in somewhat generalities here, but I think we took a multifaceted approach to this in the early days. One of the interesting ways that we did this was by sharing educational material on quantum technology and quantum computing to a wide audience within the enterprise, all different subject matter experts. And from that sort of community groupthink perspective, we got a large list of potential use cases, right? And I think to some degree, there's kind of a no-brainer suite of financial industry related use cases. You only have to glance through the headlines to find out what a lot of the big financial players are working on. And so I think that's somewhat ubiquitous across financial firms as well. So you've got sort of the pre-canned no-brainer set of use cases. You've got the organically generated selection or a variety of use cases from the subject matter expertise across the enterprise. And then it's just a matter of exploration and discovery. I don't know if it was Brian or Doug had used that term, but yeah, looking out there. So now you've got this great tool, you've got something of a Swiss Army knife, and where can you throw it? Whether it's machine learning or anomaly detection or intrusion detection. And we're still discovering potential use cases as the industry as a whole is discovering use cases. But yeah, I think you have to filter out what the most, not just relevant cases are, but the most technologically feasible. And I think someone had made the point, it might have been Brian, that there's this balance between the maturity of the hardware and the capabilities, and then the maturity of the algorithms and those capabilities. And they don't always line up. So yeah, it's an ongoing sort of reevaluation of where the potential value might lie.
And can I add something on Peter? You gave a good start. I think end to end needs interfaces, and quantum computing is a coprocessor for very specific things. And we talk about data load and embedding this in the overall process. And I think that's the crucial challenge. To not only look what could quantum computing do, I don't know, for traveling salesman or whatever thing, but how do we interface our ERP system with a quantum computer so that it gives us the best route? that's not so obvious. And also for quantum chemistry, so how do our supercomputer multi GPU cluster work, hand over a specific task for protein folding to an annealer and back? I think that's the overall orchestration, I think, is also coming up now as we understand the potential niche of the QPU, what could be done. Interfacing the stuff, I think that might be at least the next challenge on our agenda.
Yeah, and if I could just tack on to that, Thomas, that was a very good point. One of the things that I think you will find that when you democratize access to what quantum computing is, and you broaden the audience and you educate a wide variety of subject matter experts in different disciplines, often you will potentially get the benefit of quantum inspired approaches, right? So in different fields, there's a paradigm shift, obviously, in quantum computing and algorithmic development. And sometimes though that paradigm shift can inspire new thinking in other areas on classical systems as well. So I think we found that there are some potential benefits along the journey, and even if they're not in pure quantum computing approaches, quantum inspired might be one of the values.
Yeah, someone actually once mentioned to me that the quantum group is not an island inside the enterprise. You have to work with people in your company, and the example that was given to me is a company that's a logistics company. They might be able to use a quantum algorithm to figure out the best way to move all their goods and handle their trucks. But then they got to put it in their ERP system. They got to have the warehouse people use it, the schedulers use it, the truck drivers use it. And, anyone who's deployed any type of system like that, that's a big effort. Just even if you have the technology to get people to use it, could be a big effort sometimes. Anyway, let me turn to a question from the audience. And this is, someone asked whether or not any of you have either forecasted an ROI or even measured an ROI from your quantum activities yet. And I'll let anyone who's done that jump in. I'm not sure anyone of you have. It's maybe still early. Have any of you tried to measure ROI yet?
We think about benchmarking. So what can quantum do better than others? And if the I is very small, you don't need a big R. I mean, that's the upside of it. So, but yeah, I mean, we're constantly thinking, of course, how can we justify that we invest? And currently, there is no really good business case. So therefore, we have more these venture investments into hardware companies. So we, at least, I don't have budget to pay a big thing. I rather go looking for funds to do joint research at the moment.
Sure. Okay. So another question came in from the audience. Once you've decided to start a quantum effort in your company, probably one of the early steps is you start thinking about partners. This would include maybe consulting partners, hardware partners, platform suppliers, those types of things. Maybe you walk through a little bit of the process of how what you look for in a partner and how you've gone through the process of deciding which ones to work with. And again, I'll start with Thomas in the upper left-hand corner of my screen.
We should rearrange screens.
I'll do reverse order next time.
No. In the I mean when we started, there was not so much there. I think we have had IBM with their 5-qubit machine and the early QuizKit, and it's not really so much about partnering, but rather exploring what is there. I think, and the ecosystem grew enormously. I mean, we've seen companies like Kyoseva, who is hosting the Q2B conference, or I mean, Cambridge Quantum, who is exploding and partnering with each and everybody. D-Wave, of course, is in the game since I'm a D-Wave fan before quantum computing was hot. Because they're the first ones who brought up the topic. But for looking at partners, I think it's just being open-minded. So look who's there, look what fits. It's like finding new friends, doing journey, and then at least I don't see it really as a business yet from our part, that there is high competition or whatever. I mean, it's very early days, and we need to work together, and whoever can contribute, and it helps, of course, if it's cheap or for free, that you learn and say, we have a brain, you have a brain. That's everybody finances their own resources and go forward and to join things together. I think that's the way at least we used to operate. Yeah, from our end.
Okay. I'll skip around a little bit. Maybe Peter, you could go next and address, partners.
Sure. Yeah, and I'd like to address this in more general terms. But I think to a large degree, you start with your vendor evaluation framework that you would have in any space, right? So you look at things like cost, resources the vendor can bring to bear, scalability, longevity. So there's some, sort of ubiquitous aspects to vendor evaluation that I think apply here fundamentally as well. But I think in this space, you have to sort of dig into the headlines. That is, this space, I think more than most others, is filled with lots of pretty sensational claims. And so sometimes you have to look a little further under the hood than you normally would with other software or hardware providers. And, mainly because in a lot of other spaces, we've played with so much hardware over the decades that we already sort of know what to expect. But in this new space, it can be a real challenge to do that due diligence.
Yeah, that definitely a lot of uncertainty there. And how about you, Lisa? Have you looked at partners?
So in our case, we first identified our use cases, and then we started to think about partners and who can really come and bring a lot to the table when we try to solve the use cases. But as I also mentioned, we are 5 quantum computing scientists coming from industry and also from academia, from different corners of the world. So we actually, I must say, we had a very wide network, and we were quite familiar with everything that was going on around the world. So finding the partners was relatively easy. Like, we didn't need someone to tell us who is working on what, or who would be a good partner. We kind of had this knowledge already. And of course, we went for the most ambitious and like the biggest flagship use case with the biggest partner. And yeah, it's more people are coming up. Of course, there are companies that reach out to us constantly and want to discuss the use cases, want to discuss partnerships, possible partnerships. So this is always evolving. But I also think what Peter said is very important, that people should really have and do due diligence on all the claims and on all of the promises, and really to check mostly the background and also the track record of the teams, especially when it comes to startups, and to see that they can actually deliver, and they have delivered previously, rather than just have empty claims.
Okay. And how about you, Brian?
Yeah, so I see this as a portfolio, not only of projects, but a portfolio of partners. And I think, like Elica said, we'd been in the game long enough that we kind of knew most of the players, and we knew the bigger players. And in fact, that's probably in part why we invested in the startup that we invested in. But for me, it's a balance of accessing the ecosystem, right? There are key academics that I think we want to work with, and we do work with. There are startups that I think are important to include in this because unlike some of the big tech companies, they're able to move in a different way, sometimes speedier, sometimes slower. It just depends on what makes the most sense. But I do like startups for certain elements of what we're doing. And frankly, there are some startups actually that have technology that hasn't really been, I guess, ingested, if you will, into the broader tech ecosystem. And so sometimes you're almost can only go with certain partners. So it depends on the topic. So I think as Elisa pointed out, you really have to understand your use cases to know who's the best that's going to fulfill this. And then I think big tech, I think we have to acknowledge that big tech is doing a lot of the drive on this and has a lot of the potential for being successful here. So I think working with those partners and being in the ecosystem in multiple ways not only enhances our portfolio and allows us to be diversified, but it allows us to participate in different ways. I still find the quantum computing community to be rather small and actually quite friendly and dynamic. I really like that. And it's by participating at all these levels, I think you see how much the community permeates all of this effort.
Okay, very good. So let's say you are working on a use case, you have partners, and you want to recruit for your team. One of the things that comes up as a recurring issue in these conferences is workforce development is so critical. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, number one, the problems, or whether or not you are having problems in recruiting talented folks, and what type of skills you would be looking for at this stage of the game. And I'll do it in reverse order now. So I'll start with Peter.
Okay. I think in general, there's three ways to approach this. So in workforce development, you can do internal training, and you can bring your brightest and smartest folks up to speed on new technologies like quantum computing. I think that's one very effective way to approach this. I think you can go on a recruiting spree, and you can go out and try and find external talent to bring in and make part of the family, if you will. And then I think there's validity to using consultants as well. Personally, I think because this technology has a bit of a runway before it's mainstream or ubiquitous across all different industries, given that bit of runway, I think there's time to go looking at internships as a great way to grow your workforce. Right. I think if you get in early, and I'd love to chat about early education as well, but I think that's a wonderful resource area to tap if you get into postgraduate folks, and you can bring in interns and adapt them to the culture and the family while they help spread their knowledge and their experience as well.
Okay. Go back to you, Brian. Are you recruiting, and what are you looking for, and how are you doing it?
Yeah, it's like I could put an ad up here. We are recruiting actually, and we're looking for people in the machine learning space who have quantum computing experience, as well as quantum chemists, which actually makes sense for exactly the types of topics that we fit. But I think Peter had a really nice answer to this, and the only thing I would add is that I think one of the things that we've thought a lot about is that the supply of talent is pretty small in this area. And so trying to find the right talent, especially when you come through with the type of topics that you're interested in, can actually really narrow you down quite a bit. So partnering, I think, also with some of the universities to think about how they can accelerate their efforts and help us to develop this talent is a key. And it's not just necessarily at the PhD level. I think that's an important element to this, but we could think about master's degrees and then perhaps more on-the-job training once they have the master's degrees to come in and be effective, maybe and impactful earlier. So I think that's another potential strategy that I could see universities really employing to help fill this talent gap.
Okay, Elica?
I really agree with Brian and also with Peter that we really need to tap into the universities at different levels, masters, after that PhDs, and help actually the universities really to define their curriculum so that it is more geared and more applied to applications and to end users of quantum computing. In our case at BI, we are at a steady state and we are not really hiring at the moment or expanding. And as I mentioned, we are 5 people. So I think that's a pretty decent size for, for a pharmaceutical company, quantum computing lab.
Sure. Okay. And finally, you, Thomas?
Yeah, we're a bit of a similar situation like all 3 before. So I would love to hire. I mean, I really love working with students, for example. I very much love these, let's say, 3-month or so prolonged hackathons where you work on joint projects that you give a corporate challenge and then have intelligent people approaching it from a point you never have thought of it. I think that's very important. And I guess about what is, I think, Peter, you mentioned it, the internal upskilling, because it's not so obvious to understand the use case. So when you're inside a company, of course, you might get a bit blind and not be open to look at novel methods, but the general quantum literacy to understand what quantum computing is, for example, what is superposition, this is okay. But then the question is, what can you do with it? And to come up to a level, I love the talk from Gopal earlier, that you really understand the possibilities that come with quantum computing and apply it really on the portfolio of your use cases. I think that's really the challenge. And therefore, I think internal upskilling is also a very important task. And what is very close to my heart is the next generation. So I think we should even think about providing quantum computing games, that people, instead of playing FIFA or whatever on the PS, they really play quantum and they get to learn quantum intuition. That once you share a problem, they say, there's a quantum feature. Did you know there's this algorithm for, I don't know, Grover or whatever? Yeah, and this is bringing this feature, and they just are native. And this is my hope, that people in let's say grad school or even earlier, maybe when you're 10, you can start doing quantum computing and learning quantum literacy. I think this would be my dream, to say we need a new generation that just doesn't need to be trained. They just come with it. They are not digital natives, but quantum natives. I think this would be cool.
Thomas, if I can, I'd like to build off of something. I think this upskilling topic is critical because you have to find the champions and the people who would support you in the organization, because they're the ones who understand the types of problems that you want to solve with quantum. And so I think it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing approach that you have to take with the organization. One of the things that I think is key to this is helping people to imagine a future, right? Sometimes this is very hard when you're very operational and you're thinking about closing the books, as an example, for the month. It's then sometimes maybe hard to pull yourself out of that to say, can I imagine a future where something like quantum computing can actually enhance or make what I'm doing simpler, better, stronger, however you want to do that. And I think that's that dialogue and that participation in what we're trying to do is critical to success in the long term.
Okay, yeah. Well, very good. We're getting close to the end, but what I'll do is I'll give each of you about 2 minutes to give a summary, and basically what I'd like you to do is perhaps just talk about the one thought that you'd like to leave the audience with that they will remember a week from now, of how they could learn from this session as well as your experience. And so why don't we start with Elica, and you can say what you think the most important thing that someone should get out of this session would be.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and actually I really want to finish on a positive note. And since we also meet each other at Quantum.Tech every more or less 6 months, I think we can definitely feel the improvement of the deliverables of quantum computing, both on the algorithmic side and both on the hardware side. So I believe that on each and every following conference, there will be more and more results, more and more applications, incremental, advantages. And ultimately, I do believe that quantum computing will be really disruptive, and we will all live to see this in our industries. And we will definitely see the change that is brought by quantum computing. So for me, it's actually very good every 6 months or so that we can look in the back and see what has changed in the industry. And there is always a very positive change. The other thing I want to say is for people that are wondering whether they should start a quantum journey for their organization or not, I do believe that now is a very good time, and they shouldn't postpone it for longer and longer because the field is really moving. And even though at the moment we still consider it more or less pre-competitive, so we are open, we share, we have all the consortia. Ultimately, I think this will become more and more closed once people start to develop applications and algorithms that will bring a real ROI, since it was mentioned. So I think that the big industries and organizations should definitely start planning and budgeting for quantum computing in order really not to miss on the opportunity of it.
Okay, well, thank you. Thomas, what would be your one thought you'd want to leave with the audience?
I think, as Elisa said, start networking, attend these conferences, build your partner network. Don't be afraid to reach out, to ask stupid questions, or just share use cases, share dreams, share fears, share whatever, and talk also to the vendors. I mean, every vendor out there, the big ones and the small ones, they're really open to talk. And for me, the important thing is don't get lost that there is this word quantum. So there's a lot of hype in quantum, of course. It's observer dependent. So it really depends on what you're making out of it. So if you have a business problem and you think you need something that never worked, why not try quantum? And then hope that you have the kind of a bullshit filter, because I think the hype is going down. I think we already saw the peak. I'm not sure if we saw the peak or
I hope.
but I think you really, I think the important part is have somebody to guide you through the hype, or build your own competence. And I think by attending these conferences and reading books, etc., this is don't give up.
Sure, that's true for almost any endeavor. Peter, what would be your one thought that you want to leave with the audience?
Yeah, so I'm going to fragment that one thought into 4 separate points. Yeah, so I think there are a number of important aspects here. One is generating excitement about the potential of the technology versus pushing the hype and over-advertising. I think that's a delicate balance, but I think passion and excitement is one of the key momentum builders within an organization. If you're selling this, you have to sell it in a different way than you would with, like, say, IDS or IPS or any classical hardware platform. I think broad participation is important. Involve the wide variety of folks in your organization. Spread the word, right? Get folks excited about this, educate your workforce, and make this a community endeavor. Don't do it in an island or in a bubble. I think early education is a key element here. Look for early talent. Consider internships. Use the space that you have before this technology becomes fully mature, and grow that workforce and that resource pool while you have time to do it now. And then first and foremost, I think if you're just embarking on this or considering embarking on this journey, other than being patient and knowing that this is a long game, find someone to bring into your organization that can be an evangelist, that can speak to the advantages, that can get people excited, that can deliver broad education, and can accomplish a multi-pronged approach to this.
Okay, great. And finally, you, Brian?
That's hard to follow. So thank you, Peter. That was excellent. And actually, thank you to all of my fellow panelists. It's always a privilege, and I feel great gratitude for being involved in this and with this these great colleagues. So first, I say that I think that feeling of gratitude is really about something that Peter mentioned, is being passionate about this topic. You know, you don't necessarily have to have a deep degree in physics to understand the potential of this. You need to bring passion to it if you're starting your journey. And I think that that's a key piece, because if people see the excitement that you have, I think they can jump onto that sort of excitement with you. And I think that helps to separate the excitement from the hype. And so I would tell you, be bold, go out there, try this, do it, right? It's at that time, as Elica said, where it's pre-competitive, we're very open to having these conversations. I mean, go to Thomas. He already made the offer already. So, and any of us, honestly, it's at that time, right, where I think you can learn a lot, you can ask questions, you can build on what we've done to help you, but you got to be bold and you got to be passionate. And if you have those things, I think you can be successful with this.
Okay. Well, very good. Let me just leave you all with one sort of saying. There's something called Amara's Law, which Bill Gates sometimes quotes, which says that people sometimes tend to overestimate how quantum or how any technology is going to impact the world near term, but they'll underestimate how it's going to impact the world long term. And I definitely think that's true with quantum, and it's a marathon. You should definitely stick to it, but it does have a lot of potential. And with that, I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank the audience. Hopefully we'll see some of you in person in Boston. I've been told there'll be a session next year in Boston, and I look forward to seeing you in person then. So with that, I'll give it back to Lawrence, and he can wrap up.
Thank you all. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. And as Doug said, I hope you've enjoyed today, and I hope to meet you all in person in Boston next June 14th and 15th. I hope we can host you there, but and I also hope you've really enjoyed today. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Shall we go to bed?
I don't have to.
Hours of work to do.
Yeah,
I have a bit of a glass of wine.
Oh, excellent.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, folks. Thanks so much.
See you.